What I've put together is the evaluation principles as we've defined them in the UN evaluation group, or based on the definitions we've developed there. And I've overlaid them with good practice standards for capacity development, because one thing which I have been doing in my career quite a lot is evaluating capacity development assistance. So I have used the ideas that have just recently come out in an OECD DAC publication in my evaluations, and I think it will be quite interesting to see how these concepts actually come together and are complementary, at least in my views. Also, having listened to many of you yesterday, I've heard so many things where I felt like, yes, that's something which I can see how it resounds in what I'm going to talk about. So I think we are actually coming towards something collectively, and that we might not actually have seen so much that we are talking about the same things and coming up with the same ideas in some ways. So the whole purpose of this presentation is to share with you a somewhat more holistic or dynamic approach to evaluation capacity development, overlay these principles and try to illustrate to you how they connect, and present that as a potential working tool. I'm not saying that this is the one way of doing it, but it's more a matter of creating awareness of certain parts that are important and necessary, and we have heard about many of them, but to get the awareness of how they have to work together and how they belong together. And so I'm going to talk about the principles and the good practice standards, and then go through the 3 levels of capacity development and then the processes. So to start out with the basics, I'm starting with evaluation principles. And in the UN evaluation group, we have developed norms and standards. They are not like, they didn't come out of the blue. They were built on evaluation principles that existed in the profession, whether you look at the bilaterals, the development banks, or any other evaluation communities. And they are the 3 cornerstones: independence, credibility, and utility. And obviously at the center there is the quality of evaluation. These are interlinked. I mean, in order to have credibility, you have to have independence. Credibility enhances utility. If people don't think that you have done a credible job, they're not likely to follow on what you have recommended. And independence in the sense of impartiality should also help you focus on being useful to decision makers. Under credibility, we have also the impartiality and transparency. As I mentioned, you have to be impartial so that people take your word. Transparency of processes. During the last yesterday, we've heard a lot of people talk about how important it is to be transparent, to be participatory, because otherwise, again, people are not comfortable. They don't necessarily trust an evaluation. On the utility side, we have something which is called intentionality. It's a bit of a handful of a word, but basically what it means is that when you start an evaluation, you would want to think about what it is going to be used for. Who are the users? What do they need this information for? And it can actually, when you do sort of more strategic or thematic evaluations, already start with the selection of the evaluation. Why are you evaluating one thing or another thing? Timeliness. If you come up with great evaluation findings, but decisions had to be taken 6 months earlier, obviously it's not very useful. And then accessibility, and there what I mean is not just that you can find it somewhere on a website or on your bookshelf, but that it is also written in a way that is accessible, that people can understand what you're saying. Here the absolutely important, and that's why it's a red line, connection between independence and impartiality, because independence in itself is not a guarantee for impartiality, but impartiality is absolutely essential to our profession. And all of this is supposed to support and foster the accountability and learning objectives of our profession. So this is the basic framework that I wanted to put to you for evaluation. I know I've gone through it relatively quickly and it's relatively complex, but if you have more questions, I'm happy to answer that. Now coming to capacity development good practice, this is something which is based on the work published by OECD DAC. There is a publication that is called Towards Good Practice, because they recognize that good practice is not something you can just simply set, and for capacity development even less. But that work coincides or is almost like the apex publication of work that has happened in the development community that deals with capacity development. There are some groups. One is ECDPM or something like that. The acronym is a little bit difficult to recall. And then the bilaterals, you look at their work, or the multilaterals. UNDP, for example, is very strong on capacity development. So you take that all together and it really comes to some very common things. And the first thing which I found was extremely important, and it links into what we've heard actually yesterday during various presentations, is that when you want to do capacity development, you have to work at 3 levels. One is the enabling environment, what Dara was saying about, creating that support within the government apparatus to convince people to buy in, setting up policies, creating frameworks where evaluation can take place, and that can be at the national level or at an institutional level. Institutional capacities, so that you have actually systems in place that ensure your independence, credibility, and utility. If you have an enabling environment and then you depend on individual knowledge and skills, namely the individuals, and we all agreed yesterday that people are at the center of this and they are essential, but you have to create a system around them, because we are human beings, we can fail, and in order to support us in doing our work professionally, we have to have systems in place, and I will go into more detail in a short moment. The second part of this whole approach, of this good practice approach, is that capacity development is a process, or processes. If we think we can have a project where we start here and we end there and then we have developed capacity, we've already started at the wrong end almost. We've heard yesterday about the continuing initiatives of people that they are driving things. I've heard a participant say as a comment in one of the presentations that, training is 20% of what we do, and then 80% is continuing mentoring, helping people to go on. And that is really true for capacity development, whether it is for evaluation or for other things. And here are some points that are really the underlying or the core messages. In